Hello everyone, peace be upon you. Before we begin, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe, and stay with me until the end of the story. Also, leave a comment telling me which city and country you're watching from. I'd love to see how far my story has reached. For those of you who have already subscribed, I sincerely wish you good health, ease in all your affairs, abundant blessings, and may all your hopes and dreams come true. Amen. Now, let's begin the story. The Nevada desert didn't care who you were. It pushed heat into your lungs and dust into your teeth and watched what you did next. At Silver Rock Naval Range, the air shimmered over tan berms and steel plates. Humvees idled in a line. Targets glittered in mirage. A handful of SEALs shaded their eyes and waited for the contractor they had been told would evaluate marksmanship. That word never sat right. Operators didn't like being evaluated by anyone outside the wire. Nathan Briggs stood with his arms crossed, cap pulled low. He was quiet when he was uncertain, which wasn't often. On his left, Cole Mathers cracked a joke about lab shooters and recoil. Owen Reyes laughed too loud, the way newer guys did. Dana Mercer kept her eyes on the weather tablet, chewing a lower lip. Wind 6 to 8 knots, variable cross. Density altitude ugly. Numbers that made long shots move. A white pickup rolled to a stop. The door opened. Avery Monroe stepped down with a black hard case and a thermos looped to a carabiner. No fanfare. No smile. Blonde hair pulled tight, cap plain, sleeves rolled. She didn't look at the group. She looked at the wind sock, then at the ridge line, then at the sun angle like she was taking a pulse. She set the case on the bench, clicked latches, and lifted a Barrett .50 like it lived there. Bolt out. Chamber check. Bipod down. She moved in clean lines. No wasted reach. No swagger. Dust clung to her boots and stayed there. Cole leaned over to Owen. Think she's going to run a computer for us? Owen shrugged. Maybe she is the computer. Briggs kept his face neutral. Monroe, he said. You have what you need. She nodded once. Target distance. Dana answered without looking up, voice flat. 3,247 meters. Crosswind building to the right. Avery lay prone, set the rear bag, and settled behind the scope. She didn't ask for a spotter. She didn't ask for a dope card. She watched the mirage tilt and stand. She tracked grit as it slid across a painted plate 3 kilometers out. She listened to the wind like it had an accent. Silence ran down the line. The desert had a sound when it was ready. She broke the trigger like glass. The Barrett hit her shoulder and the bench breathed dust. The report rolled until it was part of the horizon. No one spoke. Somewhere far out, metal ticked once. Not loud. Just true. Owen's mouth opened. Cole lowered his binoculars and raised them again, like the second look would make more sense than the first. Avery opened the bolt and caught the casing in her palm. She checked the mouth. Set it aside. Clicked one more wind. Breathed. Shot again. Another long roll of sound. Another single tick from steel. 2 holes lived close on a plate no one touched at that distance. Dana exhaled through her nose. Grouping holds, she said, to no one in particular. Briggs only nodded. Not approval. Accounting. He had a habit of counting assets and risks the same way. He watched Avery wipe the receiver with a square of cloth, slow and routine, like she was making the rifle ready for a next time that always came. Word walked the range faster than a radio. In the mess at noon, Owen swore he saw the plate through the scope and it was center. Cole said the wind was junk and she beat it anyway. Dana didn't argue or agree. She scrolled back through her logs, wind spikes, temperature slips, pressure drift. The numbers said the shot was stupid. The shot didn't care. By late afternoon the heat softened. Avery stayed on the bench, breaking the barrett down to parts. The cloth moved with the patience of someone who knew cleanup mattered as much as the shot. Briggs stepped close enough to speak without an audience. "You always do it like that." She kept working. "Like what?" "Make it look simple." She set the bolt aside. "It is simple. It's just not easy." He let that sit. "There's interest in you beyond this range." She didn't look up. "There always is when plates ring." He thought about the email on his phone from Rear Admiral Victor Holden. He thought about the last time JSOC sent something marked priority and how long afterward the night sounded different. "You're here this week," he said. "We'll schedule joint drills tomorrow. Dana will feed you environment. We'll see how the team reads your calls." "They don't need my calls," Avery said. "They need to see what the wind does to theirs." At dusk the light went copper and the wind laid down like a dog at someone's feet. The operators drifted off to racks, to showers, to their small private rituals that made the next day possible. Briggs walked the line alone. He liked to look at lanes when nobody was talking. Steel out there, quiet and honest. He could still hear that faint ping living in the valley. He checked his phone again. One new message from an intel contact he trusted because the man never used adjectives. "Fort Ainsworth wants a read on the civilian. Potential tasking window opening." Briggs tucked the phone away. He didn't give yes or no to ghosts. In the barracks, Owen fired questions at Cole about spin drift and Coriolis until Cole threw a towel at him. Dana sat on a cot, thumbs moving over a tablet, building a model she didn't believe would ever be as good as a human eye when the wind got strange. Out by the benches, Avery zipped the case and looped the sling over her shoulder. She paused, looked downrange one last time, and left without turning around. Night over Silver Rock was a cooler kind of mean. Generators hummed. A dog barked at something it would never catch. Briggs sat in his office with the overhead off, screen glow painting the room. He opened Avery's contractor packet. Half the lines that mattered were thin or missing. Prior deployments, redacted. Training history, partial. Recommendations, clipped. A note from someone he knew at Quantico, 2 sentences long. Capable. Silent. He trusted that more than the paragraphs he got from people who liked to hear themselves talk. He thought about the team and where she would fit if fit was even the plan. He thought about outcomes. There were days when being in command was choosing a smaller damage. He'd learned to respect anyone who could change a line of events with one clean action. He also knew tools broke if you didn't handle them with care. Outside, the desert traded heat for stars. Avery sat on the tailgate of the pickup and drank coffee that had gone cold. She didn't mind. She watched the wind sock lift and drop in the dark. She pictured the plate 3 kilometers away, 2 holes that didn't argue with each other. The day had been loud. The quiet after was better. She closed her eyes and let the last minutes play again, not to feel proud, but to check for mistakes only she would see. Briggs locked his office and walked the gravel back to quarters. He had a name in his pocket and a request climbing the chain. Tomorrow he'd run Avery with his people and see what held. The range lights clicked off in a row. The Nevada night pressed close and said nothing at all, and that silence followed Briggs into the morning. The desert went from black to pewter to burnt gold, and before the generators fully settled into their hum he had Holden on the line. The Admiral didn't waste syllables. "Fort Ainsworth wants a read on your civilian. Tasking window may open today." Briggs watched sun flare off the steel plates and answered the way he answered every request that felt like a hand already on his shoulder. "Send the packet." By Chow, a transport list was posted. By noon, AC-40 was buckling down a flight plan east. Avery didn't ask what changed. She saw it in the tempo. Cases stacked, ammo counted, checklists spoken instead of typed. Dana sealed her tablet in a hard shell and kept glancing up at the wind, as if the sky might tell her a secret before they left Nevada. Cole backed a Humvee to the loading dock and tossed packs like he'd been born doing it. Owen tried not to look thrilled. Briggs signed for a courier pouch with a red band and slid it under his arm like it weighed more than it did. Fort Ainsworth didn't look like much from the air, just a clean geometry tucked into Virginia trees, but inside the SCIF the world was jagged. Wall screens glowed with mountains rendered in false color, roads no one admitted existed, heat blooms nesting in stone. Major Elias Turner chaired the brief with a voice that sounded like he'd been awake a week and chose every word anyway. Highlands, Hindu Kush. Complex of caves at elevation 2000 plus. Possible HVT movement re-established, code designator, Orchard. Locals report hostages in the service building, no confirmation, but patterns suggest forced labor. Air window is crowded, collateral risk unacceptable. Briggs didn't sit. He read the angles. Insertion. Turner tapped a slide. Backdoor route. Rotary to a saddle 1 click southeast, foot to OP. You hold. You observe. If we get clean confirmation and the geometry works, we authorize a single shot to collapse the command node and open the corridor for assault. You're the overwatch, another element moves on the ground. His eyes found Avery without asking permission. Civilian long-range observer under your command authority, Commander. Our models degrade at that distance in this terrain. We need her read. General Douglas Merritt came in late, coat still open, an aide trailing with coffee. He scanned the room and settled on the line that mattered to him. Authorization remains with JSOC. No freelance shots. No heroics. We neutralize without headlines. He didn't look at Avery, but the sentence landed like it knew where to aim. Avery's face didn't move. Dana's did, just a fraction. They ran through atmospherics, the kind that decide everything at range but bore the people who never leave the building. Pressure. Temp gradient. Historic gust vectors down the east wall of the valley. Dana walked the table with a stylus, showing swirls in blue where wind got mean. Sensor history says topography makes a venturi just off this outcrop. If she shoots from here, she's going to see drift that isn't linear. Avery nodded once. It won't be linear. Turner let himself almost smile and then didn't. Holden joined by secure feed, a rectangle of steady salt and pepper and distrust. I don't want a myth, he said. I want an outcome. Briggs said, outcome is the only thing we carry home. Merritt slid a folder across the table toward Avery. If this works, Quantico would like you for doctrine development afterward. We've got a recruiting gap with long-range ethics. A face would help. She didn't touch the folder. I don't do faces. Turner's pen paused. Briggs didn't bother hiding approval. Gear issue moved like a river. Plates, comms, med-night vision checked and rechecked. Dana snapped a small weather meter to Avery's sling and then, after a second thought, slid a second into her own pocket. In case the mountain lies, she said. It will, Avery answered. Cole taped chem lights low on his pack. Owen threaded his tourniquet through the same loop he always did for luck and called it procedure so no one would give him grief. Briggs walked the team with the calm that told them everything they needed to read, no promises, just work. On the tarmac at dusk, rotors chopped the Virginia air into rules. The birds smelled like oil, canvas, and 10,000 other miles. They loaded without chatter, bodies finding the places they always find. Turner climbed aboard last and crouched by Briggs. Signals discipline. If we lose the pipe, you default to commander's judgment. He looked at Avery. You don't fire because you can. You fire because everything else says it's the least damage. Avery clicked her harness. That's the only reason to fire. The flight was long enough for doubt to make offers and short enough that no one could accept. Red light washed faces hollow. Owen stared at his boots until Cole bumped his knee. Breathe like you're not trying, Cole said. Dana scrolled her model and watched it refuse to settle. She closed it and slipped the tablet away, trusting the thing she hated trusting, a person at glass reading wind with eyes and patience. Briggs rested his head back and gave himself 3 breaths of sleep and spent none of them. Wheels down on a forward strip, cold snapping teeth. They moved to smaller birds that could climb where maps went vague. The second hop felt like being carried in a mouth. Mountains rose, black on black, then gray on black as the moon had its say. The pilot's thumb lifted once off the collective and planted them on a notch of rock with room to spare if everyone believed it. Boots hit. Sound changed from rotor to blood. The team spread to shadow. Briggs put a gloved hand on Avery's shoulder and pointed. The ridge he wanted. The bowl they'd watch. Lights down there, orange and thin, like someone had poked holes in the dark and let a village leak through. Dana crouched behind rock and whispered numbers, air biting the mic pressure high. Temp drop steeper than model. Cross 9 to 12, gusty left. Avery unfolded the Barrett into a geometry she trusted. Bipod bit. Rear bag nested. Scope breathed her in. She let the world shrink to glass and the small movements inside it. Below, sentries moved on loops that would teach you if you watched long enough. Trucks made a language of coming and going. Someone lit a brazier and cupped hands over it. The wind tried on outfits, none of them quite honest. Turner's voice in Briggs's ear was low and far and steady. Confirm presence before we open the door. Merritt's channel stayed quiet, that was the best it ever did. Owen's knee bounced until Cole pressed it flat with 2 fingers. Dana read drift off a scrap of blowing snow and sent Avery a single word, left. Avery didn't answer with words. Her crosshairs did the talking, off target, on edge, back off. Patience, not theater. Minutes crawled and stacked into an hour. The mountain waited like it had all the time in the world and none for mistakes. A figure emerged with a different gravity. Not larger. Just heavier in the way influence weighs. 2 guards shortened their steps without thinking. He pointed once and the brazier moved. Turner's breath touched the net. Pattern match 89. Need 95. Hold. Briggs felt his jaw set and made himself unlock it. Dana watched the mirage bow and then stand. She's got a window in 30. Maybe 10. Maybe gone. Avery tracked the eddy like it was a thought she'd had before. The crosswind tilted, not the way the model said, but the way the rock would force. Briggs could feel the team leaning forward with their bones and forced them all back with a whisper. We wait until the world says go. The figure turned his head, and for a second the angle gave away a scar the intel packet had circled 3 times. Turner came over the net, voice thinner. 96. Green on confirmation. Execution at commander's discretion. Avery settled 1 half-click, then another you take when paper stops helping. She let breath out and didn't chase the last of it. The trigger lived under the pad of her finger like it belonged there. She didn't shoot. A guard stepped into the lane and argued with the wind. The moment folded. Down in the compound someone shouted toward the service building, and through Avery's glass a smaller movement trembled, too small for doctrine, exactly the size that doctrine exists for. Dana whispered, child, without knowing why she knew, and none of them moved for a heartbeat that felt legal and holy. Avery rolled the rifle off the line and waited for the mountain to exhale. The wind changed clothes again. The figure reappeared in a cleaner geometry, pride putting him where math could find him, the brazier light opening the hollow at the base of his throat. Briggs didn't have to say it. The team already knew what they were, and what they weren't, and what came next if one clean action made a path. The night tightened. The ridge held. The valley listened. And the shot that would change the shape of the room below lived one calm breath away. Avery kept it leashed. She let the urge to finish drain out of her hands and back into the snow. The valley below moved in inch gestures, guards trading positions, sparks lifting off the brazier, a door opening just enough to let a rectangle of light cut the cold. Dana whispered updated numbers, barely air. Pressure holding high. Cross 10, gust to 14, veering left, then back. It's dirty. Briggs answered with a steady, copy, that sounded like ballast. Turner's voice crept in from the net, thinned by distance. You still have green on confirmation. Execute only when geometry protects hostages. Merritt stayed silent, which meant he was listening for a sentence he could sign. Avery read the mirage like it had a stutter. The wind didn't lie, it just spoke in fragments. She floated the crosshair off the sternum, let it hover in the pocket where drift would land around clean, and rolled off again when a guard shouldered into lane. Cole nudged Owen's boot with his own. Don't lean into it, kid. Owen didn't answer. His breath steamed, then stopped steaming, as he remembered to close his mouth on it. Across their small world, metal ticked as it cooled and warmed, expanding and contracting at a rhythm no model charted. Minutes don't pass the same up there. They stretch thin and then snap. A patrol sloughed off the far building and started up a goat path that arced uncomfortably close to the SEAL's right side security. Cole eased lower behind his rock and angled his muzzle into a dark seam. Briggs murmured, let them walk, the way a chess player touches a rook and then doesn't move it. The patrol paused to stamp feet in smoke, a flare of orange cracking the dark like a bad idea, then turned back. Owen exhaled his first prayer of the night and pretended it was weather. Dana's tablet gave up 2 bars, then 1, then none. Losing uplink. She pulled the spare meter from her pocket, clipped it to a strap, and read the tiny screen by ghost light. Micro gusts slamming out of the cut. It'll fake you right, then shove you left at the top third. Avery didn't answer. She watched a sliver of blowing snow skim the canyon lip and vanish like a magician's scarf. The scope fog tried to bloom at the edge of the glass. She blinked slow, kept her cheek welled, and refused to breathe into the eyepiece. Turner's net cracked, recovered. Ground element report static at entry grid. If we don't open them a door inside 10, they shift to contingency and we lose clean. Briggs checked his watch without seeing it. We don't open on a bad read, he said, not to argue with Turner, but to make the rule louder than the clock. Merritt finally came in, clipped. No secondary effects tolerated. If you can't guarantee, you don't take it. Avery's mouth twitched, not a smile. Guarantee is a word buildings use. Movement changed below. The man with gravity stepped into the courtyard again, now with a different escort, one peeled off left, one lagged right. He spoke to someone inside the doorway and gestured with 2 fingers, a habit Intel had tagged in old video. He turned 3/4 to the brazier, giving Avery a plane to solve. The wind tried to push a lie through the cut. She ignored the big picture and read the small, flame lean, cloth ripple, the angle of a threadbare banner nailed to corrugated tin. A distant thump rolled through the ridge, not artillery, something shifting on the mountain itself. The air paused and then decided to be something else. Dana's voice tightened. Veer right for 2. Then it'll slap back. You'll overhold if you chase it. Avery slid a half-click and refused the second. Cold pressed the barrett into her bones. The trigger lived under her finger, familiar as truth. A hiss on the net became words. Turner again. Heads up, possible counterglass. Thermal ping at roofline, north side. Might be a scope. Might be a pipe. Cole's jaw set. If he's glassing, he's blind on our angle. Briggs didn't move. No one lifts above the seam, he said, and the ridge flattened itself by will. Owen's teeth chattered once and stopped. Time, he asked nobody. Later, Cole said. Always later until it's now. Below, a child's cry wove out from the service building, thin and human, the kind of sound that puts hairline cracks in doctrine. 2 guards glanced that way in reflex. The HVT, if that's what he was, half turned to bark, weight on the right foot. The hollow at the base of his throat opened again. Avery felt the shot line up like an apology. The radio coughed and died. For 6 heartbeats, the net was just snow and the slow rasp of cold in the throat. Briggs didn't fill it. In the space where orders could have lived, the team lived on rules they already owned. Dana pressed 2 fingers to Avery's sleeve and tapped once, not permission, not pressure, just I have the same eyes. Turner clawed his way back into the net. Signal unstable. Commander's discretion stands. Your window is collapsing. You miss it, we abort. Merritt's silence sharpened. A gust lifted grit in the courtyard and then set it down evenly, a rare clean tell. Avery watched the brazier flame bow and hold at the same angle for more than a second. That was as much kindness as the night would give. She nudged the crosshair a fraction off flesh into the place where drift would carry it home clean. The guard on the right stepped to scratch his cheek and put his shoulder in the lane again. She rolled off, let him have the space, and waited while adrenaline tried to make a case for impatience. Cole's whisper slid over rock. We're good. We're ghosts. He wasn't talking to anyone who could answer. Owen counted down from 5 in his head and lost the numbers. Dana breathed once like she was lowering her heart into a quieter room. Briggs kept his world small, angles, arcs, consequences. He pictured the assault element poised in shadow, boot soles inches from a sprint that only made sense if the door opened with precision. He pictured what happened if it didn't. The patrol that had threatened their flank earlier reappeared, this time higher, this time curious. One man tilted his head as if the ridge had spoken. Cole flattened deeper and angled his rifle not to shoot, but to look like a rock. Owen became air. The patrol's leader sniffed the cold and decided night was bigger than suspicion. They turned back, boots scuffing a rhythm that took a year off Dana's shoulders. Turner again, softer. If you have it, take it. If you don't, we live to plan the uglier version. Merritt gave them nothing and everything by staying off the net. Down below, the HVT stepped forward again to push the brazier with a boot, exposing that same triangle of light and skin. The guard to his right, bored now, looked away to spit. The wind, for the first time in an hour, held the same sentence for 3 breaths in a row. Avery let the world get small enough to hold. Crosshair. Edge. Drift. Drop. The math wasn't on the tablet anymore, it lived in the way the flame leaned and the way dust refused to fall straight. She settled the pad of her finger and took up the slack until there was none left to take. The mountain exhaled. The valley listened for what it didn't know it was about to hear. Briggs felt every muscle choose stillness over speed. Dana's hand found the ground to anchor herself to something that wouldn't move when everything else did. Owen's eyes went wide enough to drink the night. Cole smiled the way men do when a thing that's supposed to happen finally does. Turner's channel steadied to a hum, as if distance wanted to witness. Somewhere inside the service building, a child hiccuped the last of the cry and fell into a quiet that sounded like trust. And with all of that stacked and ready, Avery took that one calm breath she'd been saving and held the world in place a heartbeat longer, the trigger a promise about to be kept, and then broken clean. The trigger snicked through the wall and the barrett spoke with a hard, flat thunder that slid across the valley. Recoil pushed into Avery's shoulder and vanished into bone and earth. Through glass she watched the round finish the math, a wafer of air, a lean of flame, a drift riding the top third, and then impact where the hollow opened. The man with gravity folded midward, knees gone, chin tipped like a puppet cut free. The brazier wobbled, through sparks, and someone shouted a syllable that didn't survive its own panic. Silence didn't follow. The compound convulsed. Guards jerked to motion, some dropping to knees, some firing blind into dark. A door banged open and a second voice tried to become a plan. That was Briggs's cue and he took it like it had always been his. Go, he breathed, not louder than wind, and the ground element poured out of shadow with the kind of speed that only comes from discipline. Cole hit the first corner like a hinge and turned it for Owen. Owen covered high, then ducked low as a round sparked off sheet metal near his ear. Boots on dust, hands on steel, decisions in inches. Dana's voice came tight and fast. Wind steady at 10, hold is still good. Counterglass likely re-engaging roofline north. Avery rolled off and on, scanning the rooftops. There, an angle wrong for pipe, too patient for nothing. She shifted a quarter hold and sent a quiet answer. The roof jerked, a silhouette tumbled, and the shooting from that line turned into confusion. Turner's net steadied as if distance approved. Ground team, corridor open. Service building entry on your mark. Briggs hit the door with the heel of his hand and Owen's pry bar did the rest. Inside smelled like rust and sweat and wet rope. 3 hostages blinked in the sudden shape of help. One was a woman with a scarf around her mouth, one was a man older than the room, the last was a kid so small his wrists looked like wire. "You're leaving," Briggs said, and they did, because the way he said it made leaving the only thing that existed. Outside, 2 fighters sprinted across the courtyard toward an angle Avery couldn't own without risking the stack. Cole leaned into the lane, 2 controlled bursts, and one went down hard, the other tripped on panic and kept moving without a plan. Owen called, "Clear left," as if saying it kept it true. A burst cracked from the far shed and stitched the doorframe near Briggs's shoulder. He ignored the splinters and moved. Ignoring is a command skill. Avery tracked the far shed and felt the wind try to shift its verb again. "Mercer," she said low, and Dana was already there. "Veer 1, then back. Don't buy the lie." Avery took half of that and refused the other half. She put a round through the gap where muzzle flash had been and the flash decided it didn't live there anymore. The valley started to believe. Turner kept their world small. Extraction window opens in 5. If you're still inside at 4, you're inside too long. Merritt arrived on the net with a tone like a signature. Minimize trace. No secondary, no escalation. Briggs almost laughed, then didn't. "Copy," he said, "because that's what you say to the kind of instruction the night could never keep." Cole and Owen moved the hostages to the staging wall and handed them to a shadow that was friend. The kid clutched Owen's sleeve and wouldn't unclutch until Owen wrapped the small hand around the strap of his own kit and called it a mission. Avery scanned the rooftops, then the ground, then the rooftops again, because counters find courage late. A door burst near the admin room and a man with a launcher took 2 steps of arrogance. Avery put a round between the idea and the act. The tube clanged to dirt and did nothing, which was the best thing it could do. 3 minutes, Turner said. Birds inbound. You will have company on your way out. He was right. From the far track, headlights blinked into being, 2, then 4, then a straggle of panic-finding trucks. Dust coughed up under tires and the engines revved like they thought slope was optional. Dana tilted her head and listened to wind across rock. "They'll try to flank the lower cut," she said. "If they make the switchback before we're airborne, it gets loud." Briggs clocked the map in his head. "We're done here," he said to the building, and the building believed him. They withdrew along their own footprints, a slow then fast that made sense in their bones. Cole took last man and didn't boast about it. Owen counted heads and then counted fingers on the kid and then counted his own breath and said nothing to anyone about any of it. The hostages moved on legs that remembered how. Avery's world tracked from surgery to shepherd. She held the switchback line and carved it when headlights blinked through scrub. A driver's side window starred and a truck fishtailed and pinned the one behind it. 2 more tried to make the turn and failed at math. She didn't celebrate. She just watched until the problem solved itself into stasis. Rotor thump rolled into the valley like a promise written in machine. Dust lifted in sheets. The first bird flared over the notch and turned its belly to the team. Briggs loaded flesh first, the older man pressed flat by Cole's palm, the woman pulled gentle by Owen, the kid handed up and then shoved back toward Owen when he wouldn't let go until Owen said, "Ride with me." Dana climbed and immediately made space for Avery's case, as if the rifle had rank. Avery stayed on the ridge and held the far door open with a last angle. Shots tried to find the bird and found rock instead. The crew chief popped a strap and reached for Owen's shoulder and became part of the team by contact. Briggs swung up last, turned, and looked for the one person who wasn't moving yet. Avery stood in the same snow she'd been lying in, glass to eye, calm as if the night had decided to end when she said. "Now," Briggs called, not loud, not begging. Just the word that holds a place for a person to choose. She broke off clean, folded the rifle by feel, and ran low with the economy of someone who'd practiced the exact number of steps. Cole's hand closed on her pack and pulled, Owen's hand pushed the kid's head down, Dana's boot slid and caught, Briggs's arm locked around a stanchion, and the bird took their weight and made it its own. The crew chief chopped at air and the pilot pulled and the valley dropped away, lights shrinking to mistakes that would have been tragedies if anyone had been slower. Below, trucks finally found the switchback and arrived into the dust the birds left behind. Above, the second bird swam into position and writhed up the valley wall with a Grace helicopter's urn with ours. Turner's voice in their headsets softened the degree. "Package clear. Secondary route is cold. Shift to exit plan Bravo." Merritt didn't speak, which meant the paperwork might someday believe this had happened the way it needed to. Inside the bird, sound became a thing that filled your teeth. Owen pressed the kid's hand to his vest and let the small fingers anchor there. The woman stared at Avery's case like it was a question and Avery looked back and didn't answer because at that altitude truth is mostly oxygen and seatbelts. Dana checked the meter again out of habit and laughed once, short. "Doesn't matter now," she said to nobody. Cole leaned his head back and closed his eyes and remembered not to sleep with his mouth open because he'd done that once and a fly had taught him the lesson. Briggs let himself look at Avery. She had the bolt in her lap and the cloth in her hand. She wasn't cleaning for show, she was turning adrenaline back into attention. He didn't say thank you. He thought it, which is different and more honest in their trade. Across the intercom, the crew chief tapped a knuckle on the bulkhead. 2 minutes to the strip. It will be busy. Busy meant headlights, shouting, a med table that exists forever for 5 minutes, and a set of questions that build the first paragraphs of a report nobody will ever read properly. They kissed down on a forward runway and rolled into a wash of white light and diesel. Medics took the hostages and turned them into people again, names, pulses, cups of water that shook in hands. Owen stood awkward with empty fingers until the kid let go on his own. Cole counted magazines and shook his head at nothing. Dana handed her tablet to a tech and said, "Delete the model I made at 1930. It was wrong for the right reasons." The tech blinked and nodded and did it, not because he understood but because her tone said this was the part where obedience saved time. Turner met them at the edge of the tarmac, hair worse than the brief, eyes better. No friendlies down. Hostages intact. Secondary forces turned back at the bend. That's the version I'm selling. Merritt hovered just behind the light, already editing outcome into language. We'll need statements by morning. Keep to the essential elements. Briggs didn't look at him. The essential element is alive, he said, and walked past toward the hangar where the quiet lived. Avery peeled away without ceremony and found the shadow at the far end of the line where wind licked through open doors. She set the case down and finished the last passes with the cloth, receiver, bolt face, crown, each stroke a small truce with the part of the night that never quits moving. Dana came to stand beside her, not facing her. "That one hold you refused?" Avery nodded. It would have missed in a gentler way. Dana smiled without teeth. Gentle isn't what saves kids. Briggs stood at the threshold and watched his people stitch back together. He had orders in his pocket and arguments in his future and a call from Holden that would ask for a map of credit. He would give the map to the team instead. Out on the strip, rotors spun down, and the mountain went back to being a line on a screen for men who liked clean slides. The desert of Virginia, softer, wetter, breathed around the hangars. Avery closed the case. The latch clicked with a tiny finality. Turner's voice came again, this time not through a radio. Quantico's going to call, he said, hands in pockets, chin toward shoes. About doctrine. About teaching the part nobody can measure. Avery didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She looked at Briggs, and he gave her the only truth leaders can afford. You do what keeps people alive, he said. Tonight that was a bullet. Tomorrow it might be a sentence. She nodded once and picked up the case. The night didn't soften, but it stepped aside. In the mess someone laughed too loud at a joke that wasn't funny because bodies needed to prove they were still bodies. In the med tent a kid fell asleep holding a paper cup like a medal. On the tarmac a pilot touched the skin of his bird like a superstition and decided to call it maintenance. And in the thin space between thunder and quiet, Avery let the promise she'd kept shrink into a memory she would carry carefully, because some victories cut you if you grab them wrong, so Avery learned to hold them with the flat of her palm. Morning came thin and gray over the forward strip, and the hangar yawned warm air that smelled like coffee and solvent. Debrief started before anyone called it that. Cole and Owen leaned on a folding table and walked the assault path with bottle caps like they were chessmen. Dana sat cross-legged on a mat, eyes on a handwritten wind log, pen tapping the margin like a metronome. Briggs stood where he could see everyone without owning the room, a habit he used when he wanted truth more than performance. Turner arrived with a folder that had already been opened too many times and laid out the bones. Timeline holds. HVT down at H plus 00:00. Ground element inside at +1. Hostages clear at +4. Contact at switchback neutralized long before rotors. No friendly hits. No civilian casualties observed or reported. He paused and let quiet give weight. That's the version we keep. Merritt stepped out of the office haze like a subtitle, voice clipped clean. It aligns with guidance. Guidance, in that tone, meant we dodged the headline. Avery stood off to the side, case at her feet, listening the way carpenters listen to houses breathe. She didn't need her part narrated, she needed to hear the echoes none of them could calendar. Dana slid her the wind log. That one dip at 21:30. The mountain lied. Or maybe we asked the wrong question. Avery read the numbers, saw the place she refused to click, and handed the log back without verdict. We'll write the question better next time, she said. Dana grinned at the word we. Owen kept glancing toward the med tent as if the kid might fade if he wasn't watched. Cole caught him and nudged a box of donuts across the table like a bribe. He's sleeping, Reyes. People do that sometimes. Owen grunted and took one he didn't taste. Briggs rolled his shoulders like he was putting on a coat that had been drying overnight. Statements in an hour, he said. Facts only. Keep the adjectives in your pockets. They filed into the windowless room where events become sentences. The recorder light blinked and men who hate microphones pretended they didn't. Cole kept it simple, the way he shoots. Owen stumbled once on the word child and corrected it to minor because he'd heard that mattered to reports. Dana said, pressure, and density, and venturi, and then stopped herself and said, wind tried to trick us and we didn't buy it. Briggs said little, which is how leaders say a lot. Avery spoke last and shortest. I fired when geometry secured the room, she said. Twice more to prevent escalation. We left with everyone we brought and 3 we didn't. Merritt nodded as if brevity saved budget. By noon the machine that eats outcomes started chewing. A public affairs draft no one requested floated in, a line about combined elements and precision overwatch. Merritt's aide mentioned a limited release. Someone at Quantico had already framed long-range ethics as a course title and wondered aloud if a human face would help. Turner's jaw ticked. She's not a poster, he said, the softness in his voice sanded down to something like defense. Briggs didn't bother with words. He vetoed the glossy pitch by looking at Merritt until the idea left the room on its own feet. Holden called on a secure line, voice like an old engine that still starts in winter. You carried the thing across. I'll keep the water flat as long as I can. Briggs said thanks and meant it. He'd learned which admirals talk weather and which actually move boats. When he hung up, he found Avery on the edge of the tarmac, sun making a halo out of dust motes around her cap. He stood beside her without announcing himself. "You're going to get asked to teach," he said. "They want your why, not just your how." She didn't turn. "The why is small. Least damage. Most truth. Repeat. Say it to a room," he said. "They'll listen." "Rooms like stories," she said. "This one doesn't fit on a slide." Afternoon brought the small mercies. The woman from the service building shook Owen's hand with both of hers and said thank you in a language he didn't speak. The meaning came through the grip anyway. The older man sat on a cot and told a medic about a garden he'd plant as soon as his hands stopped shaking. The kid woke, saw Owen, and waved like they were on a street and not a war's shoulder. Cole hid a smile in a coffee cup and Dana took a picture of her wind log only to delete it a second later, superstition bowing to OPSEC. At sunset the team rolled west, back to Silver Rock, back to a sky that took no interest and offered no judgment. The range looked smaller after mountains, but it felt honest, and honest was a thing everyone needed more of. Humvees lined up where they always did. Steel plates waited like they always would. Briggs gave the evening to his people. Some ran drills because rhythm was medicine. Some sat on tailgates and learned how to laugh again without feeling disloyal. Avery took a lane, not to shoot, with the case shut, her hands empty. She stood at the bench and watched heat lift off the dirt in mirage stripes that the wind combed and uncombed. Dana drifted over, hands jammed in pockets. "Quantico pinged me," she said. "They want help designing the curriculum if you say yes. They think an engineer can translate what a mountain says." Avery looked downrange. "Mountains don't talk," she said. "They insist." Dana snorted. "Okay, then I'll teach insistence." Briggs called a short huddle when the light went copper. "We'll do the paperwork. We'll file the reports. We'll answer the questions that deserve answers. After that, we go back to work." He let that settle and then gave the only praise he allows. "Nobody got left. That's the job." Cole nodded like that could be etched on a wall. Owen met Avery's eye and tried a grin. "You ever miss?" She saved him from the trap. "Every good shooter does," she said. "You just don't hear about the ones we choose not to take." Night came without ceremony. Generators coughed to life. Range lights hooded half on, half off. Turner's SUV rolled in under the stars, tires whispering on gravel. He handed Briggs a thin envelope and a thinner smile. "Pentagon wants doctrine, Commander. They can't measure what they can't name. If she writes it, they might stop pretending it's magic." Briggs turned the envelope over. "She hates paper." Turner shrugged. "So did a lot of the people who saved us trouble." Avery didn't open the envelope. She sat on the hood of a truck and let the desert cool her bones. She thought about the shot, then peeled the thought away before it got sticky. She thought about the kid's hand on Owen's vest. She thought about words she could stand to say in rooms that smelled like carpet and coffee, words thin enough to carry but thick enough to hold weight. Least damage. Most truth. When to wait. When to let a door open. When to accept that a clean shot and a clean conscience share the same breath. Briggs eased up beside her, elbows on metal, eyes on nothing. He didn't tell her what to do. He told her what he tells himself. You don't owe a crowd a story. You owe the next team the tool you wish you'd had. She nodded, finally cracking the envelope. Inside was not a contract, not a headline, just a letter of interest with a simple line, "Teach us how you know when not to shoot." She surprised herself by exhaling like someone had just set down a weight she didn't realize she'd been carrying. Across the dark, Dana laughed at something Cole said and then pretended she hadn't. Owen tossed a donut hole into the air and missed it on purpose to make the kid in the med tent smile when he heard about it later. The range held its breath the way places do when they've been used for the right reasons. Avery slid off the hood, picked up her case, and walked toward the armory. Some victories need to be put away correctly so they don't cut you the next time you reach for them. And if Quantico was a door, she could step through without turning herself into a poster, just a person with a sentence that might keep somebody alive when the wind lied and the world made offers dressed as urgency. She decided the door could stay open. Quantico didn't arrive with trumpets. It arrived in an email that said, simply, "We'd like you to teach." Avery drove east with the case in the back seat and a note card in her pocket that held 4 lines: least damage, most truth, wait if waiting protects, take the shot only when the room is already safer for it. She said them out loud at a red light and felt ridiculous, then felt ready. The classroom at the Advanced Ballistics Institute didn't smell like the range. It smelled like carpet, dry erase markers, and the tired coffee of government buildings. 15 students sat straight because chairs make you do that. Some were Marines, some Navy, a few from federal units that don't advertise. Dana had helped shape the syllabus and sat at the back first day, pretending to take notes and actually watching Avery's hands. Turner sent a single slide for day 1, a photo of a valley with the wind drawn in blue lines like veins. Briggs wrote nothing, but his name sat in Avery's phone like a long answer if she ever needed it. Avery didn't start with math. She started with the thing that kept her breathing. "You already know how to build a dope card," she said. "You already know how to range without a laser when you have to. What you don't get taught hard enough is when to let a shot go. So we're going to work backward from that. We'll read wind, we'll check holds, and then I'm going to make you wait until you hate me. Because there will be a day you hate me, and that day will save somebody." A few smiled. Most didn't. That was fine. They went to the range because doctrine on a whiteboard grows wrong in a hurry. Avery made them log the wind by tells you can't buy, the way heat shimmer leans, the way a flag that isn't a flag, a shirt on a line, a string of prayer cloth, fights its own weight. She stood behind each shooter and never touched a shoulder, just tapped the stock once when patience mattered more than confidence. When someone rushed a shot cleanly and hit, she thanked the math and then made them run the same scenario with a moving non-combatant drawn in. The second time, most of them waited. A few didn't. She didn't shout. She circled the result and asked the question she had written on her note card in a 5th line no one saw: "Did your shot make the room better?" In seminar she told the class about false permissives, moments the world pretends to give you permission because you're bored or scared or proud. She described the lie of a steady flame that hides a curl of wind you can't see unless you look at the grit, not the fire. She talked about the freighted silence after a shot and what to do with it. She did not talk about legends or distances, not because they didn't matter but because they weren't the product. The product was a living person who didn't get hurt. Word reached the parts of the building that approve things. A memo climbed a ladder. The course got a code and a slot in the catalog that assistants would cite for the next audit. It wasn't a movement. It was a class. That was enough. Dana high-fived a lab tech in the hall and then pretended she hadn't. Turner stuck his head in the door on week 2 and nodded at the board as if it owed him money. Merritt sent a short message: "Keep it within policy." Avery replied with 3 words: "Keep policy human." When she needed air, she drove back to Silver Rock on long weekends and borrowed a bench no one owned. The range hands waved and gave her space. She didn't shoot much. She watched new groups try to rush physics and learn the same old lesson from steel. Cole dropped by one Saturday on a motorcycle that sounded illegal and brought 2 sweet coffee. He grinned. "Reyes says hi from dive school. Kid's lungs finally learned which way is up." Avery smiled because that was better than any certificate. "Tell him to count slower," she said. Cole laughed. "He already talks about counting the way you talk about wind." Spring put a line of green along the Virginia roads. Quantico students graduated, not with applause but with a thin stack of paper and a handshake that said use this right. Avery mailed her note card to Turner without a return address and wrote one sentence on the back before she sealed it: teach them to listen for the word no and say it to themselves. He wrote back 3 weeks later with a photo of a whiteboard where a lieutenant had written that same sentence crooked and underlined it twice. Briggs's retirement orders showed up on a Tuesday. He sent a text that was half a joke and half a map pin: Pier, San Diego, Friday at sunset. She booked a flight and didn't tell anyone why she wasn't in class. The dock smelled like salt and fuel and old rope and everything he'd spent his life hurting. He stood with his hat under his arm and watched the horizon like it owed him nothing. They didn't hug. They don't. They walk to the rail and let the Pacific make the parts of the conversation that need an ocean. They'll fold your class into doctrine, he said, eyes on water. Then someone will try to make a slogan out of it. Don't let them. I'll teach it until I don't have to, she said. Then I'll go back to a bench. He nodded. Sometimes the bench is the class. They stood there until the sky did that trick where it looks like it melts and then just becomes darker. He handed her a small cloth pouch. Take care of your tools, he said. Inside was a simple bronze brush and a bottle of oil that smelled like a shop, not a store. She felt something tug behind her ribs and set it down gently, like a bolt. They talked about nothing for a while because that's how you end something without making a speech. He told her he'd buy a terrible boat. She told him she'd say terrible things about it until it got better. He said he'd sleep for a week and wake up early on day 2 like always. She told him to learn a new kind of patience that didn't need a scope. A gull screamed at the wrong time and they both laughed. The sun fell into cloud and came out again like it had changed its mind. Back at Quantico, the last block of the course was office hours with no office. Students brought scenarios from their units and Avery disassembled them like rifles, put the parts in a tray, and asked which piece they really meant to pick up. A Marine captain with a jaw like a shovel said, "Ma'am, I can make the shot 10 out of 10. I don't need permission for the math." She drew a rectangle on the board. "This is your lane. The shot lives here. Who else is in the room? Draw them." He filled the board with stick figures and doorways. She tapped a place he hadn't marked. "What's that?" He squinted. "Noise." She nodded. "That's where you wait." By the last class, she had the students stand behind each other's scopes and call the game for the shooter, not to be a spotter, but to learn humility about what they're blind to. It made them kinder. It made them better. She collected their notebooks and read their wind logs like diaries. Some wrote like engineers. Some wrote like poets who tried to hide it. She wrote a single comment in each: "I trust your pace. Take it into rooms with you." On her final free day before the course rotated to another lead, she took the Barrett out not to a valley, just to a lane. She cleaned it before she fired because that rhythm told her who she was. She put 3 rounds into steel at a sane distance and listened to the honest ring. She broke the rifle down for the last time that season and oiled the crown and set the bolt aside on a rag the way a person sets aside a thought they want to keep. She wasn't making an altar. She was preventing rust. It mattered. Night put its shoulder against the windows of the armory and the base got quiet the way it only does when there isn't a launch in the morning. Avery closed the case and clicked the latches with a sound she knew better than most doorbells. On her way out, she passed a bulletin board where someone had posted a photo from somewhere cold. Cole had written in pen under it, "We waited. We're good." She didn't smile, exactly. She let her mouth admit pride without argument. At her apartment she set the case under the table like a loyal dog and made coffee too late for sense. She wrote an email to Dana that said only, "These students will save us trouble," and got back a reply that said, "I'm stealing that line." She texted Owen a thumbs-up emoji he'd pretend to hate. She stood in a small square of quiet between her sink and her window and watched a breeze poke at the tree the city had planted wrong under the streetlight. If there was a lesson worth keeping, it wasn't mystical. It wasn't the distance. It wasn't the rifle. It was the boring, serious discipline of not letting need or pride make you fast when slow would save a life. It was the comfort of work done right and confessed clean in a report. It was the sound of a steel plate telling you what happened without drama. It was the weight of a child's hand on a vest and the way it changed the next choice. Avery didn't write a book. She wrote a curriculum and a habit. She kept her face off posters. She answered the phone when the few who knew her number needed a sentence they could carry into a room that would punish them for guessing. And when she closed her eyes, she didn't see the shot, not most nights. She saw the minute before it. The choice. The small, steady no that made space for a better yes. Persecution wasn't punishment. It was a kind of mercy you could measure if you were honest. She held that, the way you hold a sharp tool, with respect, with care, and with the quiet promise to use it only when the room is already halfway safe. Then she slept.